Welcome back to another video right here on Free Will Photos. Today, we're going to take a look at an image that I edited a few years ago with an older version of ON1 Photo Raw. Now, if you are a member of the Free Will Photos Academy, you're going to have access to this particular session file, and you'll see that I have a lot of snapshots. If you're not familiar with snapshots, those are just versions of the edit that I was working on. And so you'll be able to really dive deep into the workflow. I'm only going to go over the final look that I decided for this image. But again, if you have access to that session file, which again, that's offered to all the Free Will Photos Academy members, then you're going to be able to really dive deep when you start looking through that particular file. Now, of course, if you'd like to pick up ON1 Photo Raw and save a little bit of money in the process, consider using the coupon code FreeWillPhotos20. I do make a small commission from everyone who uses it, but that's at no extra charge to you. It's a win-win for everyone, and I thank you for everyone who supports the channel in that way. Now, let's jump into the computer and take a look at how we can revisit images so we can learn from our past edits. Let's go. All right, here we are inside of ON1 Photo Raw 2026, which is the latest version of ON1 Photo Raw. And I have the final image here. So let's go ahead and take a look at what it used to look like. So this is the before straight out of camera, and this is the after. Now, I do have a crop on this file. So if I hit the letter C, you can see I did crop in. Now, for this particular review of the edit, I'm not going to redo the crop per se. I mean, I guess I might have to if I go back to the original, but we'll see. Nonetheless, this is the crop. And so I just wanted to show this so that way you can see, and then we're going to go ahead and get back into it. And so I'm going to come over here to the snapshots. And again, as I mentioned, if you have access to the session files, then you'll be able to see all of the different versions or the snapshots that I saved for this particular file. But I'm going to click on original, and you'll see that it brings us to this image here, which is actually, yeah, it's not cropped anymore. And so we're going to have to crop this. I'm going to press the letter C on the keyboard, and I'm just going to pull this in. I'm probably not going to get the exact crop, but the idea here is I want the squirrel to be on the lower right third. And I like this diagonal leading line going through the bottom portion of the frame. And for me, what it does is it kind of helps point the viewer's eye back down into the main subject area. And then on the right side, we have this tree that's kind of anchoring the squirrel right here into this PowerPoint or control point, whatever you want to call it. And so that's the reason why I'm doing it this way. You can crop however you want. This may or may not be a strong composition to some people, but this seems to be the composition that I enjoy. And so I'm going to leave it just like this. And I'm going to press the blue check mark. And so now he actually looks like he's too far down. So let's go ahead and just pull this down. I think this is actually more of what was in the final edit anyhow. Maybe a little tighter, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. All right. And so the next thing that we need to do is start working through our actual develop settings here. All right. And so I'm just going to minimize the snapshots because I need some more screen real estate on the right side here. But ultimately, I need to be able to see my tools. All right. And so the next step here, I could click Brilliance AI, but I want to revisit the information that I applied to this image previously. I'm not a naysayer of Brilliance AI. In fact, I use it a lot. But when I do this particular technique of revisiting edits, I like to go through the manual adjustments because that's how I did this particular edit. I like to go through those when I'm working on the file. So that way I can think, is this something that I still want to apply in my editing style today? All right. If you have solidified your editing style, you may find yourself a little stagnant when it comes to photo editing, and perhaps it may not even be fun anymore. And so for me, this is my way of staying fresh and light with the way that I approach editing my files. Enough of that. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the camera profile. Now, on the previous edit, I did use the ON1 portrait profile, but let's see if I even want to use that again. ON1 portrait doesn't look too bad, but let's see if there is anything. Now, I like camera portrait, and this actually gets us pretty close to what that original vibrancy looking file was, or the vibrant looking file. So perhaps I'll go with this, but you know, it's always good to explore. And I don't want to make this video like crazy long. And so I am going to actually go with the camera portrait, but I think I'm going to use the .dcp file. Now, a lot of people ask me the question, Chris, how do I get these .dcp files for my camera? And I'll be honest, I don't fully know. However, the more you edit files with ON1 Photo Raw, I believe that ON1, it just starts to read those and it pulls them down from the ON1 server. I could be completely wrong, but if you know how to get these .dcp files added into ON1, by all means, please leave it in the comment section. Make us all smart. All right. Now, I'm going to go ahead and commit to this .dcp file. And again, this only works on raw files, by the way. And so if you are not able to see the camera profile, it's probably because you're working on a JPEG or a PNG, something that's not a raw formatted file. And so now that I have that set, it's time to start working with everything else. And it looks like for some reason, there's some adjustments on here. So let's go ahead and just reset this. The first one here is going to be contrast, and for some reason exposure is set to a +5th. And so contrast, it looks like I went with a +15. And so the way that I do this technique is I go over here and I push this to +15 and I say, okay, well, what is that actually doing for the image? And so before and after, I do like how it's just starting to bring a little bit of richness to the overall file. And so I would probably leave this contrast adjustment, at least for now. And then highlights, I went -15. Now I'm going to hold down the J key and I'll notice, or you'll notice that big red mark over there on the left side. That means I got highlights blowing out. And so as I pull this down, I imagine that -15 is probably somewhere near, oh no, -41 is what I needed to actually recover that. And so knowing what I know now, I would just recover the highlights in the develop section as opposed to just trying to play the cutesy game of, you know, pull it down -15. So that's already something that I'm learning more about my editing style. And that's kind of the benefit of revisiting images that you've edited years in the past, especially if it's an image that you really enjoyed. All right. Try to recreate it using the notes of what made that look. So the next thing was midtones, and I went with a +10 on this one. I'm not sure if I really want to do that right now, because what I've learned is what I like to do is really recover my highlights, and then I like to come over to my levels, and I need to expand that, and I'm just going to hold down the J key, and I need to pull my black and my white point. Now, on the original edit, I did not move the white point. And that was something I did very common in my previous editing workflows. I did that intentionally, but now I'm a little bit more deliberate about establishing my dynamic range. And so the way that I do that is I pull my blacks all the way down until I start to see blue, and then I pull that right back up until it goes away. And so -5, which in the original, I went to -30, you guys. So I'm already starting to get a little bit of a different look and hopefully managing the file a little bit better. We'll find out. And then I like to come over to the whites and pull those up until I start to see red, and I'll just pull that back till it goes away, because I did just recover that with a highlight slider. And so this is my way of making sure that I have information going from the far left side of my histogram all the way over to the far right side. Very, very helpful. And then what I like to do is mess with my midtones and my shadows. Now, my midtones here were at a +10. And so if I go ahead and pull my midtones to the right, if I pull them to this +10, which is about here, and then I had my shadows pulled up to an 11. And I think that was because I was noticing the squirrel was getting a little dark. And so I wanted to increase that with the shadows. Now, knowing what I know now about editing, I probably would not worry about that so much, because I could use local adjustments. And so I am actually going to pull my shadows down. And I think this is going to help with the overall final edit. We'll find out. And then I'll pull up on my midtones and let that breathe a little bit of life into the image. Now I'm going to hold down the J key. You'll notice that I am not getting any clipping indicators. And that's the reason that I like to set my black and white points first. And then when I work with the shadows, like I really have to pull the shadows really far down in order to start clipping. But when I start working with the shadows and the midtones, because it's going to be really hard for me to make something clip with the midtones. I have a little bit of blue indication over there, but the reason I like to set my dynamic contrast so much with the black and the whites is that's the furthest that the file is going to be able to go, because I've already established my black and white point. Now I just have to play around with my midtones and my shadows and highlights to really get a good exposure of what I want. And so for this one, I'm actually going to push the midtones a little bit further. And it's going to brighten up the overall image, give it a little bit more light presence, so to speak. And then I'll play around with the shadows here as well. Maybe just boost those up a little bit. I don't need a whole lot, right? Now, with all that said, we're going to move down here to the structure. Now, what I noticed in the previous edit, I did not use structure. I'm not sure why. I just didn't. And I found that all raw files, they can use a little bit of structure. So I'm just going to go ahead and add in some structure, because this is the way that I like to edit now, right? And so about 28 looks right. This is one of those eyeball things. You have to choose what works the best for you and your style and your aesthetic, right? Now, with this image, because I know that I'm going to go with a little bit of a fade on the darker tones in the image, I could probably pull up on the haze slider here, and you can see it just starts to like dull the image. I'm not a huge fan of that. So I probably wouldn't do much with the dehaze here. Usually, and sometimes it's helpful, especially in outdoor images, to use the haze slider, because it'll help break up some of that atmospheric dissonance or issues or whatever, where something may not look quite as contrasted as it did to your eye. And that's just because the camera can't see as well as your eye can. And so sometimes adding or removing haze can really help make things look the way that you want. But again, use that sparingly. You don't have to. Just use it in an eyeball manner, or at least I will. All right, let me go ahead and minimize the structure there so we can see the color section. Now, I do have some notes on color. All I did was I moved the saturation and the vibrance. Now, for me personally, I do like to mess around with my white balance. And so I'm going to warm this image up because I feel like it could use a little bit of warmth. So I'm just going to pull that just a little bit to the right. I don't need to add a whole lot, right? Let's go ahead and take a look at the before. This is straight out of camera. And this is where we've gotten so far. And so I'm starting to, I guess, prime the canvas, as I like to say, and I'm moving the image in the direction that I really do want to take it. And so with the saturation, what I like to do now, instead of removing saturation, is I actually like to add saturation in the develop section, because I can really tailor how this saturation gets modified later. But if I don't give enough information for the local adjustment section and the effects section, which happens later in the workflow when you are editing inside of ON1, you are essentially trying to raise something that just didn't have it there to begin with. Whereas if you boost it in the develop at the raw level, when it gets to the local adjustment and the effects section, you have a little bit more wiggle room on how aggressive or how mild, I guess you can say, you want to go when it comes to editing the color in your images. And so that's the reason why I'm going to increase the saturation. And then I just like to throw a little bit of vibrance in there, because it just helps balance out all those colors that maybe were a little less saturated, and just brings everything kind of to a even color equity, so to speak. All right. And so that is the develop section. Here is before and here is after. And already with just using the develop section, I believe I've gotten pretty close to the final image. And so I think that I'm not going to need as much work in order to get that final look, but we're going to find out. Let's jump over to the next section, which is local. Or I'm sorry, before we do that, let's just activate the lens corrections. I had that activated on the previous one. I was using the 100 to 400 RF 100 to 400 on my Canon R6. So it automatically found that lens, which is great. We don't have to do much of anything, and I like what it's doing there. So now we can jump over to the local section. Now, with the local section, I had really only two adjustments here. And one of those adjustments was the vignette to darken everything else around here. And so I'm just going to create that really quickly in my common way, which is I'm going to come over here to where it says add adjustment, press the more icon. I'm going to come down to gradient, and then I'm going to click add. This is going to give me a linear gradient by default. I want a radial gradient or a circular gradient. And so I'm going to come over here. I'm going to select edges, and we're just going to pull this down. And you can see it's just darkening the outside of the circle. And so for the last edit, and really any edit that I would do of this sort, I am trying to create a little bit of directional movement in the photo using this particular leading line here. And so I'm just going to rotate this to kind of give the illusion that the light is going in that direction, right? And I'm going to tighten this down just a bit and then feather it. So that way all of the attention is naturally going to the squirrel. It's going in a relatively similar line as the squirrel. And to me, I think that this looks pretty good. So if I turn it off, you can see everything is just kind of bright. You know what to focus on, but your eyes still want to kind of wander around the frame. But as soon as I turn it on, it's easy, because the brightest thing in the frame is the subject. And so that's just a very simple editing technique. I've done that a number of times. I've talked about it, so nothing new there. But the next one, it was really more of a dodging technique, and a burning technique, and I'm not sure I need that. So I'm actually not going to add it, at least not right now. I can come back and add it later if I feel like it's something that would help with the overall aesthetic of the image. And so now it's time to go into stylizing. This is what we came into ON1 Photo Raw with straight out of camera. And here is what we've gotten so far with just some basic editing techniques and some intentional decisions and develop, and obviously the one local adjustment here. Now, I'm going to go to effects, and the first one that I want to add is a color mixer, because I like to jump in and modify my color relatively early on, and that's something that I've been doing for a long time. I still really enjoy doing that, and so I'm going to come down here and add a color mixer, because that was the tool that was being used previously. Now, in fact, I'm actually going to call an audible and go with my actual color tool of choice, which is the color enhancer. And the reason I like the color enhancer is it's just more robust. You got more capability available to you. But with this particular color tool, I want it to focus on the foliage. And so I'm just going to click foliage, and you can see it makes like this really weird green background, and that is not what I'm going for overall. And so let's come over here and start working with some of these colors. I'm going to come to the the yellow channel range or color range. And I'm actually going to pull that towards orange. And this is starting to give more of that fall look that I really want, but still give a little bit of enhancement and focus on the foliage in the background that is blurred out anyway. And then I'm going to also come to the greens, and I'm going to move that more towards yellow. And I think I'm going to darken down the greens just a little bit. Again, I'm probably not going to get this perfect to what I created before. This is, me revisiting and applying some of my new techniques or my new thought process of editing, right? My approach that I'm using now. And I do this from time to time because it is super, super helpful in learning photo editing, all right, and developing a style. And so with that being said, I think that this looks good, but I don't know. Yeah, I think it looks fine. I was going to say I don't want this over my squirrel, but I think it looks fine. So we're going to leave that just as it is. But I am going to increase the vibrance, and then I'm going to come to the opacity slider. I'm going to pull this down all the way, and then just fade this into the background until I start to get the overall look that I would really want to see in this particular image. And so we'll go maybe somewhere like this, and I'll call that good. I don't need to go overboard with this. I just need to make sure that it is looking relatively cohesive and natural. The goal here is to look as natural as possible. Let's go to the next filter, which is a glow filter. Now, I love using glow filters. It's found in the creative section right here in the middle. And so what the glow filter does, and I'm going to tell you the non-technical term because I think that it just matters. I think that it's more helpful non-technically knowing what the glow filter does. And it makes things a little bit more rich. All right. And so as I pull up on this glow filter, look at how the colors just become a little bit more cohesive and a little bit more rich. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's okay. You can definitely see the impacts of the glow filter. Now, that's with the default. All I did was apply it, pull up the amount just a little bit here to about 35, and I'm using the soft light mode down here at the bottom. All right. And then the halo is set to 10. You don't need a whole lot of the glow filter. That's what I found in my use of this particular tool. You don't need a whole lot of it. It really does go a long way. And so if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see how it's just starting to add a little bit of richness to the overall aesthetic of the image. And I actually really, really enjoy this. All right. And so we're going to go ahead and minimize that. And we're going to jump into the next one, which is a little bit of sharpening. I don't know if I really need the sharpening now that I'm looking at this, but we're going to apply it anyway, because this is how you identify if it's actually helpful or not. But we're also going to use some of the new tools found in PhotoRaw 2026. So if I hit add filter and I come over here to sharpening, which is in essentials, you can tell I don't use it a whole lot. I probably used it a lot back in previous versions, but I just find now I don't really need to apply too much sharpening to my images. But you let me know in the comment section, are you using the sharpening tool inside of effects, or are you using a sharpening tool in Develop, or maybe just another software altogether? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, down here we have sharpening, and I don't need it all over the place. I just need it on the subject here. And so one of the new tools inside of ON1 is the subject and background masking tools. Now, one of the most confusing things, and I do hope that ON1 fixes this in a recent or a later update, but right now, whenever you apply a filter, it goes over the entire image. And so when you are using the masking engine that's in ON1 Photo Raw 2026, you have to think in kind of a backwards mindset, especially relative to how the local adjustments work. But here's the simple answer. When you are in the effects module and you want to use the background or the subject masking tools, you have to ask yourself, where don't I want this effect? Okay. So right now I want the sharpening effect on the squirrel. I do not want it in the background. And so since I don't want it in the background, I need to click background. Okay. I have to ask myself, where don't I want this effect? And so what ON1 does is it'll read the image, and then you can see it selected the squirrel for the most part. Did a pretty good job here on the tail, and this is probably the branch and all that good stuff. And so now I've only applied the sharpening to the squirrel, and you can tell that because I have this white cutout and everything else around the squirrel is black. All right. So just keep that in mind. Where don't you want it? And then click the background or the subject mask. Now it goes a little bit deeper than that, but that's the easiest way for me to explain how to use the masking inside of the effects module, because they do kind of work a little bit different between effects and local. But that's for a different video, and I actually have a video talking about masking. So, all right. We got the sharpening on here. If I turn this off, turn it back on, it's kind of helping, kind of not. I don't know. I'll leave it for now, maybe get rid of it later, but that's all that I would really do with the sharpening because I don't really use that tool anymore. All right. The next thing is the curves filter. Now, the curves filter is an essential, and it's located here in the essentials. So if I go ahead and click on it, I'm going to get access to this interesting little diagonal line. And it's actually good to know how to read the curves module or the curves filter, because this is actually a very, very powerful tool. This grid represents the darkest pixels in the image all the way down here at the bottom left corner, and up here in the top right corner represents the brightest pixels in the image. Now, as I move this node across from the left to the right, you'll notice that the image is starting to get darker. And the reason that's happening is because I am introducing the darker point of this image closer to the brighter points of the image. And so what that means is more of the image is going to be covered in dark pixels. All right. And as I pull this to the left, you'll notice that I start to get brighter. Well, if I start to move this up, then I start to remove the darkest pixel, or at least I start to lighten the darkest pixels. So there is no true black in the image. And this is how you can get a faded look. If I pull this all the way up, you can see I'm just introducing white into the image. So, you know, if you're familiar with paint and mixing paint, the more you add white to something, the lighter it gets. Well, that's essentially what we're doing here with the curves, right? And so I'm just going to go ahead and push this up just a little bit. And when you do this, when you fade a look, a little really goes a long way. But more importantly, you're going to want to include a little bit of contrast back into the image. And so to do that, I'm going to grab a point right above here in this lower quadrant, and I'm just going to pull down. And what that does is I'm introducing more blacks into the image, but I'm kind of just balancing that overall contrast. Now, again, this isn't intended to be a class on how to use the curves module, because I'm probably like grossly under explaining how this tool really works. But if you have just, a curiosity, I do actually have some videos a little bit older, so maybe I need to make some newer ones. But I do have some videos that talk about the curves filter. And so if that's something you're interested in, just drop it in the comment section, and I will make sure that I get you the older videos, and then possibly make a more updated version of the curves filter video. But what I'm doing here is probably not even really noticeable right now. And so I'm going to fade this even further, because I do want kind of like a filmic look on this image. And that's kind of where I was going with this. And that's the reason why you want to fade it, because you don't have a true black in the image. And so if I hold down the J key, and even if you look at the histogram, you'll notice I don't have information from the far left side of the histogram to the point where all of the information is showing. That's telling me that I have kind of lifted the blacks. That's the terminology. And so that's ultimately what I wanted to go for here. I did that in the old edit, and that is part of the style. And so I want to continue that here. Now, we're going to jump. We got two more filters, and then that'll be the end of this particular edit. So color enhancer with the for the brown fur. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and add a filter. I'm going to throw in a color enhancer, and I'm going to come to the oranges, and we are going to play around with the color of the squirrel. Now, I'm not looking anywhere else except for on the squirrel. And so I want him to stand out against those trees. Not that he doesn't already, but I really want to bring some attention to him. And so in the orange channel, and maybe even in the yellow channel, I'm just going to play around with the brightness and saturation. And maybe I need to go to the reds. Yeah, that's really impacting the squirrel. So I'm going to make him a little bit brighter using that. And let's go ahead and pull down on some of those saturated reds, or the reds. Pull that saturation down. And yeah, so let's turn this off, turn it back on. It's a minor adjustment, but I feel like he's fitting a little bit better with the background. And again, I only want this on the squirrel. So I'm going to come up here, click background, and now I've only applied it to the squirrel. So if I turn this off, turn it on, you can see exactly what's happening with the squirrel, and maybe even give him some more vibrance there. Pull back on the saturation so he doesn't look like he is radioactive or super glowing or anything like that. But ultimately, I like where we are with him standing out in the overall scene. And so the last filter is, again, more of a stylistic choice, and it was the sunshine filter. And so I'm going to come over here to the landscape column, click on sunshine. And I don't think it needs a whole lot of this, so I'm going to pull the amount down and maybe even push the saturation. And then I'm just going to pull the opacity all the way down, and then just blend this in ever so slightly. I'm not even sure this really needs it for this particular look, because now the overall image feels just a tad bit dark to me. And so I'll probably turn that off. Actually, I do like it. I just need to balance this look a little bit. And that's just, going back and forth. So I'm not going to go like crazy nitpicky, because the idea here is looking at the notes. And by the way, when I say looking at the notes, I have a notepad here that I wrote down all of the things that I did previously, and I just kind of follow through it. This is what I do on almost a monthly basis. I revisit at least 1 to 2 edits from a previous shoot, and these have to be edits that I like. And then I go back and I apply what I've learned so far, just to see if I would keep the same technique or if I would modify something. All right. I really, really recommend that you do the exact same thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at the before. This is straight out of camera, and this is the after. Now, what's more important is how well does it fare to the final look that I created a few years ago? Well, I'm going to click on snapshots. We're going to add this as new look 26. Okay. And then we're going to come over here to the final look. And if I click there, this should change. And this looks way different. This may not even be the correct final look. Here, let's click here. Nope, that's the black and white. So maybe that was the final look. And so I think I like what I got out of this. And here's just a completely different one. So ultimately, I think I actually like what I got out of editing the image now versus this right here, which was the final look. I think that it's just way too bright, doesn't have as much saturation overall. And so that's the reason why I recommend that you do this, because you'll find that over the years, your editing techniques, they do change, you get better, and it's not a bad thing. Like, I'm not saying that I don't like the way that this final image came out. It's just not the final look that I would go with today. With that, I hope you found some value in today's video. In the comment section, I want you to tell me if this is a technique that you either practice or a technique that you would like to start practicing, because I really do think that this will help you out. If you got questions, please leave them in the comment section below. If you'd like to join the Free Will Photos Academy, there's a link in the description box below. Now, if you want one-on-one training and you want someone to help you learn how to use ON1 Photo Raw, consider signing up for a training call with me. And again, a link for that is in the description box below. If you'd like to save money while shopping at the ON1 website, consider using Free Will Photos 20 at checkout. That is a coupon code. I do make a small commission from everyone who uses it, but it's at no extra charge to you. And so it's a win-win. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.